we came back to Australia. We got married in Australia, so my family were here on the beach at Shelley Beach. And it all turned around from that day. From that day onwards, I became a possession. I no longer was treated as a human being. It just changed. It was like suddenly I was no longer a woman, I was a possession. Moving to the US, we lived in a country area that was away from any city office work. So I was isolated from being able to do any marketing or advertising work. I was a full-time mum, which I chose to be because I could afford to be, but I still missed all of that, and I had no family that supported me or stood by me. So it was very isolating being in the USA. Through that time I was fully dependent on him, his family, his friends, and therefore everything was judged through his eyes. He was absolutely wonderful when we were entertaining. So I did lots of times of having family, of his family and friends and sailing friends around, and was very busy with that. But then behind closed doors, he treated me very differently. He ignored me. He really didn't want to have a conversation. He basically thought I was an object. I often felt like something that had been put in the cupboard, and when he wanted to have something to do with me, he would bring me out. He would complain if I spent money going to the hairdressers or having the kids looked after. But it was my money we were spending, not his. But he would think nothing about spending $3,000-4,000 on a new part for the boat or new sails without even talking to me about spending that money. You weren't really taken as a person anymore. There was no more flowers that he brought home at lunch. There was no more coming home at lunch times. If I tried to organise a date night, he would tend to be late coming home and then would complain over the meal the whole time about how much it was. So there was nothing romantic left in the whole thing. As far as physical violence, yes, he would lose it. He would lose it every so often. But perhaps I can go back at this moment to one time when I just wasn't well. I had had concussion. I had to take myself to the hospital with 2 toddlers in tow, and he was too busy to come and help, too busy to drive me there, too busy to collect me there. And the next morning, when he got up to go to work, he was leaving home around 7:30, and I got up to speak to him over his breakfast and realised that I couldn't stand, that I could only crawl. So I crawled on all 4 to the kitchen and said, I can't look after the kids today. I'm not capable of it. And he just looked at me and said, well, I have an appointment with the plumber this morning and there's nothing I can do about it. You'll have to do it yourself. So I crawled back to where the telephone was and I rang a friend who was also, I met her because she was a carer and cared for my kids a couple mornings a week. And she just said, hold on, my husband's about to go to work. I'll ask if he can pop around. Now, this person lived 20 minutes away and he was heading off to work and he was willing to come that 20 minutes to pick me up and go back. My husband heard me say that'll be lovely and concern about his extra driving. And at that point he said, I'll take the kids, because obviously he was going to be embarrassed in front of the children. But until then there was no thought about worrying about me. It was his own image that was a concern. Sometimes he would just lose his temper. You could tell the way he was walking into the house that something was wrong. And I got into the habit of running and hiding, as did the kids, under the beds in the bathroom when we recognised that. But if we didn't get there in time, I would be held against the wall and just verbally abused and told I was no good and told that I was useless. I have blocked that from my mind. I cannot actually hear his words anymore. And I guess I grew up as a child pulling the blind down after each occasion of violence with my mother because I had to live with her. And then, that happened again and again. I just thought really not that much of it, because it was reminded me of my childhood years, and just thought that's the way families were. My mum had been that way, my husband was that way, so I didn't recognise that as inappropriate. A lot of the memories of the abuse, I've done the same with my husband. I have blocked them because I can't live with them every day. There was one time, that really upset me, was my dad had just died. We were back in Australia. I was trying to act normally, which when you're grieving for your own father is really tough. So I'd done the washing, I was putting the washing away in our cupboard, and he came in and he started hitting all my buttons, all the things that upset me. And found out later that he had turned a video player on and made the children watch this happen. He had told them, watch how we can really upset your mum. See how we can push her buttons. And I just felt so degraded and so upset that my children were being taught how to abuse. During my marriage, I had lots of bruising. My neighbours would come over frequently and check that I was okay. It was scary, but I thought nothing else of it, just because of my childhood upbringing. I had lots of bruising on other parts of my body as well, my shoulders, my pressure points. He would just press them till they hurt, particularly if we were going out. And he would laugh. He would laugh when I asked him to stop it. And that was just day-to-day life in the marriage. And you look at it from the outside, we did really, we sold the house because he didn't like a mortgage and went sailing, and everyone thinks how lovely it was on a boat. But sometimes he would just wake up and start screaming and shouting. He would wake up the children. I would go round to their cabin and curl up in their bunks with them and calm them down. And he would just stand there at the end of the bed, just staring at us for hours. He would scream at me at things like, you jabbed me in the ribs for snoring, and I'm not snoring. My husband was 6'4", and I'm only 5'5", 5'6". And so he would overpower me quite easily. He would shove me against walls, he would hold me on my neck, he would grab me on the shoulders and really sort of press me in parts that hurt a lot. And he would just let me know that I was a useless human being who was someone who has caused more angst in his life than anything else. When we went cruising on the boat with the boys, was all romantic and lovely and idyllic, and there were moments like that. But there were moments that he would just wake up in the dead of the night and cursing me because apparently I had jabbed him in the ribs or kicked him in some way in bed, and I obviously had done it on purpose to upset his sleeping pattern. And he would just be screaming at the uselessness of me and how little I thought about him and how selfish I have to be as a human being. And the kids were just, obviously in a little boat, would hear all of this and start screaming themselves. So I would go around to their cabin and cuddle them and try to calm them down and, eventually fall asleep with them usually. And he would come and he would follow me. And the moment we got into it with the children, he would just stare at us, not a sound, for hours and hours. He would just, and one time I fell asleep and he was still there in the morning, standing at the head of the bed, just where our heads were, staring at us. In some ways I just wondered how a person could remain so still, and wondered if something was wrong with him. I was no more afraid of my husband than I was of my mother, because it was all just same old. I'd come from where someone got angry and abused me as a child, and I'd married my mother. I'd married a person with the personality of my mother. What happened really when my mum and he got together when we moved to Australia was they were like as thick as thieves. Mum blamed me for all the failures in her life, and he blamed me for all the failures in his life. So it made me feel very insecure. It was worst time because I wasn't being abused by one person but by two. And I felt that I wanted to hold my marriage together. So we moved to Queensland to be away from my mum and that influence, thinking that would give us a chance, because I didn't want to put the kids into a separated marriage, and I still hadn't accepted domestic violence existed in my life.